China right now is going through a pretty interesting period in terms of, well, first of all, you have all the sort of calamitous consequences that stem from, maybe, likely the Wuhan lab, virology institute, and then, they made doctors disappear early and could have had a much more decisive manner in terms of containing this virus if they acted more quickly.
Yeah, it would have been nice had they not jailed doctors.
They not like lied to the rest of the world and did gain of function research and all that. But aside from that, so then you also have the new news is kind of Xi stepping away, basically backtracking from their more capitalist front that they've been pursuing for, I guess basically since the Deng Xiaoping administration. The most recent example was like shutting down the entire private tutoring sector, right? They, I guess, are delisting Didi, which is like the Chinese Uber, from our stock exchanges. Seem to be more. They obviously what happened with Jack Ma and Alibaba, they creating a hostage video because he criticized the government, so they put him in this place. We should also mention the Evergrande thing, their biggest real estate construction firm, falling on hard times. Yet to be seen what the ramifications of that are. What do you make in terms of like what America and China's relationship, particularly economically, how do you see that changing over the years? Do you think China is going to run into some economic trouble? And if so, does that affect the United States?
Well, I do think that China runs into economic trouble. I think China is going to hit the great brick wall of China, which is its terrible demographics. That dastardly one-child policy that was in place until a few years ago led to female adoptions abroad, female infanticide, and now they're going to be paying the price because they don't have enough young workers to support retirees. China is aging, faster than any other country, and there's a terrible mismatch now of young men and young women, because young men were prized over women by families that could only have one child. So now you've got 50 million or so young guys who are frustrated, randy, can't get a date.
Yeah,
that's not
what you want in your society, that's for sure.
Yeah. Meanwhile, they're amped up on Red Bull or oolong tea. That's a lot of energy that's going to be released, and it could be in protests and so on. So China's got a huge problem. It doesn't have a healthcare system that will support old people. At the same time, it is trying to make sure it can capture economic assets, including land. And if it can't capture them, it wants to retake them or build them. And what do I mean by all of that? A couple things. First of all, has been widely reported, China is building its own islands in the South China Sea, to the annoyance and now fear of its neighbors in Vietnam and elsewhere. At the same time, China lends money to Africa and to Asia, and if countries don't pay back, they take the land,
right.
As they did with Sri Lanka. They build ports, and it's it's recourse debt.
They took over Uganda's airport, their only international airport.
That's right. That's right. So if they ever do a remake of an Entebbe strike, it'll be Chinese flags waving instead of Ugandan. We see that the Biden administration has woken up to China in some way. And we saw the deal to supply nuclear submarines to Australia, which offended the French. But China is looking for its own hegemony. And it wanted to buy, it thought it could buy influence, but now the threats to Taiwan are real. I think there's a significant chance that China tries a takeover attempt to Taiwan, and beyond that, even Okinawa, which is Japanese. I've been to Okinawa. Just as Vladimir Putin looks at Crimea and Ukraine and comes up with his excuse that, well, there are Russian nationals there who are being persecuted by the Ukrainian government. I need to protect them, so therefore I'm going to goose step my way through Crimea. The Chinese will do the same thing with Okinawa. They will say they're Chinese nationals. They may even be a majority of the citizens of Okinawa, and the Japanese government's oppressing them. And Okinawa is more or less just as close to mainland China as it is to Tokyo, so we're taking it. So I think there's a real reason to be concerned about China, and it's building up its military at a very fast pace. I think the US has fallen behind in research on hypersonic missiles. And I say that not spouting off, the top of my mind, but more or less you can quote US Air Force officials saying the same thing. So the world map is looking scarier.
Yeah, I actually didn't know that about Okinawa, that it had a large Chinese population.
Well,
That's
you'll be hearing about it when China takes over.
Yeah, I know. So that is one of the things I fear is so obviously with Taiwan, they control what, how much percent of the semiconductor industry if they get a hold of Taiwan? And semiconductors are basically one of the most valuable resources in tech today. So that's one aspect. Obviously, there's many other aspects that are just calamitous if they do that.
But I think it's also we, the American people, have now noticed that China's exports are not just among electronics. We all knew electronics and toys and clothing were largely made in China, but until COVID struck, how many of us knew how many antibiotics were
Right.
actually imported from China, or even ventilators, which at the outset of COVID we thought were, the life-saving machines that every hospital was going to need 10 times over. So I think there's a renewed scrutiny about trade with China,
Right.
and a new definition of what strategic items are. And they're not limited solely to military grade items.
Right. And also the rare earths, which is a huge component as well. It's crucial for all sorts of electronic products that we need. Basically for, a lot of our modern life, relies on these rare earths. And they control a large part of that market as well. Yeah, the Taiwan thing really concerns me. And I actually spoke to, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but Dr. Pry, he's one of the experts on sort of EMPs and has a very thorough understanding of the nuclear arsenal. The hypersonic missile thing is unbelievable. It's like the same people who, were caught off guard thinking that there was WMDs in Iraq didn't know that China was making these hypersonic missiles, which render much of the billions and decades we spent on defense of missiles. Basically, a lot of those defenses are useless now with hypersonic missiles because it could just evade all sorts of defenses that we have in place.
When I was a young man, I recall when Argentina took over the Falkland Islands from Britain, and Margaret Thatcher, said this would not stand, and she sent her navy there, and they took back the Falkland Islands. But there was a moment that was truly frightening when a British ship was sunk by a Chinese Exocet missile. This was a long time ago. This was before Deng Xiaoping. It was before China, had built a new Shanghai, and we knew that China could produce advanced electronics. The idea that in the early 80s, China could produce a missile that would sink a British naval ship that was indefensible was a shock. So to think about China today developing missiles, it is entirely believable that they could have leapfrogged the US and Britain and every NATO power when it comes to that sort of mechanism.
Yeah, no, it's pretty unbelievable, the money we spend on defense, and they're able to get such a asymmetrical advantage.
Well, and the fact is, if we were ahead of them on that research, they would have stolen that research anyway through spying, and it would be over, in Beijing pretty quickly anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. One of the other problems with China is and this gets into the whole woke Wall Street stuff, where you have, I think BlackRock might be like a pretty good example of this, right? So BlackRock basically pressures all these corporations to pursue certain ESG initiatives, actually translate into certain like left-wing ideological goals. And then they score you based on those ESG initiatives. And then they have, conveniently funds where the companies that did well on the ESG initiatives, whether they be, certain carbon emissions, or maybe could be even support for certain like left-wing groups or BLM or something of that nature, get into there, and then they charge people money for that. I mean, it's a whole, it's a really great business. And then meanwhile, those same kinds of people had nothing to say about China. I think you saw probably Ray Dalio as well a couple of weeks ago, basically, refer to China as some sort of strict parent. And
what's shocking is that folks who you would think would be beyond intimidated.
Right.
If you're worth X billion dollars and you still can't speak your mind, well, unless he felt he was speaking his mind and he just equivocates and thinks there's no difference between a dictatorship and a democracy, that's possible. Yeah, have someone like LeBron James. My gosh, I think if I were 6'8", and had LeBron James homes and his money, I might finally feel as if I could say what I think. But instead, he kowtows as if he's 4'6" and making a minimum wage.
Yeah, I know. Whatever happened to fuck you money, right? It doesn't exist apparently.
Well, I guess it's now in yen or won.
Yeah.